What's up, guys? It's Beating the Bookie, and we're going to talk about the college football top 12 for the playoffs. Talk about their best wins using this week's AP Top 12. As we all know, number one team in the country, the Oregon Ducks, who I predicted went undefeated in the regular season. They are number one. Their best wins this year are, of course, at home against Ohio State and against Boise. Oregon's looked great all year. Besides tripping up, starting slow against Idaho in a 24-14 win to start the year, Oregon has looked great, and they've been steamrolling opponents since the Ohio State game. Number two, we've got, of course, Ohio State. Ohio State lost at Oregon. Ohio State's best win on the season is Penn State. They beat Penn State 20-13 at Happy Valley as a 3-point favorite, I may add, but that's about their only good win at this time. Their schedule, besides Oregon, has not been, very tough outside of that Penn State game. Third, we've got Texas. Texas has looked fantastic this year outside of 1.5 against Georgia. Right? Texas has looked dominant at times. Ewers has looked dominant. Texas looks fast, and they have some big players who lay some heavy hits and some guys who can really run elite track speed. Coach Stark has done a great job with them this year, and Texas has looked great. Their best win probably this year is probably Florida this last weekend. Florida was a team that was playing a lot better, in the last few weeks. Napier, of course, got extended into next season. And Florida has just been playing some pretty decent football, almost beating Georgia last week, but that's another story. But Texas, number 3 team in the country, their best win on this season is still Florida. So some say they don't really have a great quality win, but they have a lot of decent wins, which is just as good sometimes. Let me go to Penn State at number 4. Now Penn State has moved up back to number 4 after they lost at home to Ohio State, where they didn't score one offensive touchdown. Drew Allaire has thrown for 5 touchdowns in 5 weeks with 4 interceptions. He has not looked great. Like I said, they did not score an offensive touchdown against Ohio State. James Franklin is now 3-17 against top 10 teams. Do they deserve to be ranked in the top 5? I don't think so. Their best win on the year is Illinois, a 3-loss Illinois team who overperformed to start the year, and they became a ranked team. I still don't think they were a ranked team, but they were ranked. But did they deserve it? Not really sure, but we're seeing Illinois the wheels are kind of falling off now. They're kind of falling back, but that's probably Penn State's best win on the year. Then we have Indiana at number 5. Indiana, we all know their schedule, 109th ranked in the country. Their schedule has been very, very weak this year. It's not their fault, obviously, because these schedules are done in advance. Their best win probably this year is Michigan State, where they won in dominant fashion. But they've been pretty much blowing every team out, with the exception of Michigan, who they beat 20-15 this past weekend. But Indiana, they play Ohio State next week, so that's a must-win game for Indiana, I think, because if Indiana loses that game, they really don't have any quality wins on their schedule. So next week is a must-win game, I think, for Indiana. So, we'll see what happens there. I guess it just depends on how they play Ohio State. With a close loss, could they make the playoff? Sure. If they get blown out by 40, can they make the playoff? I don't really think so. So I think that game next week is a must-win for Indiana, whereas I think if Ohio State probably has 2 losses and they lose that game, they probably still make the playoff just because they're up in second place right now in the polls. Next, we go to Tennessee. Now, I think Tennessee should be ranked ahead of Penn State. Tennessee's best win on the season is Bama at home. Tennessee, they have an elite defense. Their defense has played great all season. They have a lot of decent wins on their schedule. I mean, they destroyed NC State. They destroyed Oklahoma, and their defense has been elite. Obviously, their offense has struggled under their young quarterback, but their defense has been elite, so you cannot ignore them. Tennessee, they play Georgia this weekend. So that game is almost a must-win for both teams. It's definitely a must-win for Georgia, because if Georgia loses their 3rd game, they're not going to be in the playoffs this year. All right, no 3-loss team is going to make the playoffs. Tennessee with 2 losses, then you start getting into the weeds with 2 losses, right? So if Tennessee wants to just control their own destiny to make the playoffs, they need to beat Georgia this weekend. And I think that'll be a close game. And like I said, it's a must-win for Georgia. Tennessee can afford to lose, but if they lose the game, they're really risking playing with their playoff certainty. But if Georgia loses that game, they are out. Then we go to BYU, and I think BYU has one of the more impressive resumes in the country this year. They beat the brakes off Kansas State, and they beat SMU at SMU, 13th ranked SMU at SMU. That's a pretty good win. They beat the brakes off Kansas State. They just had a good win at Utah this last weekend. Utah, one of the toughest places to play in the country, if you weren't aware. But yeah, great win for BYU, and BYU probably has the most quality wins in the country, in my eyes. I think BYU, if they win out, if they go 12-0 in the regular season, I think they'll make the playoffs no matter what. But I wouldn't be surprised if people drop them out for name bias. But yeah, I like BYU to finish the season 12-0. And I think if they finish 12-0 and say they lose the Big 12 championship and finish 12-1, I think they should still make the playoffs. But that's for another day to talk about. Like I said, their best wins, Kansas State and SMU, 2 of the better teams in the country. Next, we go to Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame, we all know they lost to Northern Illinois as a huge favorite, which was a huge upset. Did we think we'd see them back at 8th place, ranked 8th? Probably not. But you can't ignore their wins. They beat Texas A&M at Texas A&M, and they beat the crap out of an undefeated Navy team. I mean, blew their doors off, and Navy was playing some very good football, undefeated at the time, and they just beat the crap out of them. So Notre Dame, of course, they play USC. They play Army this weekend. That'll be a tough game. So if you beat Texas A&M, Army, and Navy, all ranked teams, you probably do deserve a spot in the top 12. And now we'll go to Bama, a Bama team that many left for dead after they lost to Tennessee. But guess what? Bama, they beat Georgia. They came back this past weekend, and they smoked LSU at Death Valley. Smoked LSU at Death Valley. Jalen Milroe ran for 180 yards and just dominated. That was the Heisman performance that they had been waiting for Milroe since the Georgia game. Alabama controls their own destiny. All right, like I said, they have quality wins against Georgia and LSU. Number 2 Georgia at the time, and number 14 LSU, I believe, on the road. So the quality wins are there. So as long as Alabama wins out, they will be in the playoff. Next, we go with Ole Miss. Their best win on the season, obviously, is Georgia this last week. So they will be in the top 12 for the playoff this week. And if Ole Miss wins out, they control their own destiny. They do have 2 losses, but if they finish 10-2 with a win over Georgia, they will make the playoff. And next, we'll go to Georgia. Obviously, Georgia lost this past weekend to Ole Miss. They also lost to Bama, so they do have 2 losses on the year. In Georgia, it's pretty simple. All right, you beat Tennessee this week, and you stay in the playoff hunt. If you lose to Tennessee, you are out of the playoff race for the first time in quite some time. Georgia's got 2 quality wins in Clemson and at Texas. Probably 2 of the best wins in the country, if we're being honest. But the problem is they have 2 losses, so they got to beat Tennessee. It's all about beating Tennessee. Georgia beats Tennessee, they are likely in. If they lose, they are out. So big game for Georgia and Tennessee this weekend. Finally, we go to Miami. And Miami, obviously, they lost a tough game to Georgia Tech this weekend. Georgia Tech seems to have their number. Cam Ward with the late fumble, but he did play a spectacular game otherwise. Miami, their best one on the season is probably Louisville, who's ranked in the top 25. And early season at Florida. Florida's a tough place to win for the opener, and it was a healthy Florida team. So they also beat, Virginia Tech, Cal, who is probably the best 500 team in the country, according to many. But Miami, it's very simple for Miami. They control their own destiny. If they win out, they play in the ACC championship. They win the ACC championship, they get one of the top 4 positions and a bye. So if Miami wins their next 3 games, they will have a bye week in the playoffs. Miami controls their own destiny. If Miami loses to Wake Forest, to Syracuse, they will be out. But Miami controls their own destiny, win their last 3 games, including the SEC championship, and they are in. And right behind them, same thing for SMU. SMU is sitting at 13. If SMU wins out, they make the playoff as the ACC champion, and they would get a bye week also. So those are the top 13 teams, guys. That's where we lie. I think the weakest win out of those, top 13 teams, the weakest, best win, right? So just go look at the teams, their best win on the season. I think the weakest one is probably Indiana with Michigan State. They also beat Washington also, but we're talking about 500 teams at best when the year ends. And I think Penn State, also their best win, Illinois. And also coming up, they play Maryland, they play Minnesota, and they play Purdue to end their year. So we could be looking at Penn State making a playoff with just one decent win over Illinois. So this goes back to all about where you start, right? It's where you start in the poll. If you start in the top 10 and you just play a soft schedule and lose, your hardest game of the season, with the 12-team field now, you'll probably make the playoffs. So just shows you the disadvantage a team like Indiana is under, right? Indiana has probably started out this season in, 50th, 55th place, right? They fought their way all the way up at 10-0, from 55th, say 60th ranked in the country, not getting any votes. They fought their way all the way up to number 5. So they were at a big disadvantage, especially if they lose. So it's going to be a great final 3-4 weeks of the regular season. Definitely looking forward to it. But I think this, people thought that the playoffs, the 12-team expanded playoff would lead to less conversation about who should make it and stuff. I think eventually we'll probably go to 24 teams, right? Give the top 8 teams a bye and have the 9th through 24th teams play each other in the first weekend, because people will complain about who's 13 and 14 and 15, this time around. If you have a top 24, you probably lessen those arguments, because if you're 25th, you probably should not be playing for the playoffs. But it's going to be an interesting season, in our first season ever with a college football playoff for the FBS. So looking forward to it, guys. Who do you think is going to win the national championship this year? Let me hear, and good luck, guys, and let's cash some tickets.